No, you're still muted. Hold on. Billy, can you co-host Polly? There you go, Polly.
Okay. I thought it unmuted. Okay. I'm so excited. I'm going to do a little, since I have all this time, I'm going to do a little background too, that about emotional sobriety, about my life, some of the things. But the first thing I want to say is that I have a book here, The Language of the Heart. This book was given to me in 1989, and on it has Polly P. an appreciation of the 41st Westman Conference, March 1989. And this is from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I spoke there in 1989. I got sober in 1977. So I was 12 years sober when I received this book. And I had been doing a little speaking since I was 10. I had been going out and speaking in different places. And I had got to go to Winnipeg, Manitoba. And this book was my gift for speaking. And on the plane home, I just took it out and I just started, you know how you'll just thumb through the pages? And what caught my eye was The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety. And then I looked, and down under that is this squiggly writing. And the squiggly writing says, this article is the substance of a letter Bill wrote to a close friend who also had troublesome depressions. And I just want you to know that's what caught my eye. And I am a person who has had troublesome depressions. I have read everything Bill Wilson wrote. When I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had been court committed behind a suicide attempt because I simply could not live with myself. I could not live with who and what I was. And then throughout the years, until I picked up this book, I suffered, and I want to use the word suffered, from depression. And today, as a result of the things I do, because I have depression, and one of the things that I had already started doing before I even got this book was I worked with others. That was the only way I could get out of myself and stop thinking about myself and stop being so depressed. So for me, the greatest gift that has been given me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is the passion that I have to work with others. And by doing that, it has helped me to not be depressed. Now, I'm not going to say I don't have depression today, but I know what it is and I immediately address it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking about one of the things that I'm going to be talking about in emotional sobriety is depression. And I'm going to talk about it right at the end of when I finish up all the character defects I have. And depression is a character defect. Bill says that. I'm going to read you that and as Bill sees it. So what we're going to be talking about here is self-centered fear depression. So I'm not going to be talking about clinical depression. I'm talking about self-centered fear depression. And that is the kind of fear, that is the kind of depression I have. And I know for sure there's probably lots of things. People run, people exercise, They send off endorphins, however they want to send off endorphins. Bill found a way to work with his depression, and I have chosen to use his way. And his way was working with other alcoholics. That was what he chose to do and what relieved him the most of depression. And it's what relieves me of depression. I just want to let you know that my name is Polly Pistol, and I am very grateful to be a member of both programs. I am an alcoholic. I got sober in 1977. My sobriety date is April the 11th of 1977. I am also a member of Al-Anon, and I get to Al-Anon in June. I can't remember the date exactly, but it was June of 1983. And I just am going to share all of that with you. I love to have Teddy is on this call, and she has lived this whole part that I'm going to talk about coming into Al-Anon, how I got here, all the stuff that happened during those times. And I believe, and I'm going to share that I would not even be sober today if it were not for the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon. And so I know that I feel that with all my heart and soul. I got sober in 1977. I was a very, very bad drunk. I was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Bill alludes to that in his reading here. When I took a drink of alcohol, I turned into another person. And when I turned into that other person, I had two small children. I was an Air Force officer's wife. I was married to a bomber pilot, and he was gone for years at a time, and I was responsible for my children. As my alcoholism progressed, I became very violent and abusive and neglectful to my children. I got to a point where I could not really take care of them, and I was very abusive, both physically, screaming at them, and such as that. So what happens is that alcoholism has affected my family very much. I also had, and as my disease progressed, my husband was medically retired in 1974, and he was the victim of, we assume, Agent Orange, because he had just done a year tour in Da Nang at the end of the Vietnam War, and shortly thereafter became very ill with congestive heart failure. He was 36 years old. His heart was so enlarged that he could hardly walk across the floor, and he had a difficult time breathing, and he was about 80% bedridden. And I was unable to take care of him. My sons had to do that. Also, I had my dad, when I was getting sober, was 3 hours away in Abilene, Texas, and I could not, dying of colon cancer, and I could not get there because I couldn't drive. My husband didn't drive, and at the time my kids weren't driving, and I couldn't get there to see him, and I'm his only child. So when I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I felt that my life was just, I had no value. Who could do this? What kind of person is like this? What kind of person abuses their children, can't take care of their husband, and is not there for what kind of a person does that? I was raised Southern Baptist, And until I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and was introduced to a new God and a very different God, I believed with all my heart that I was born a sinner, and what had happened to me is I was going to burn in hell. And the Baptist Church also preached, "Thou shalt not drink." So consequently, when I got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I knew hopelessness. I was court committed to treatment. I ended up after that suicide attempt, you get the attention of the authorities, and I was put on a 72-hour hold in a psychiatric hospital, which was enough time for my husband to obtain a court order from a Fort Worth judge that I was a detriment to myself and others, and I was court committed to treatment. And I entered a treatment center on April the 11th of 1977. And by God's grace and a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink yet. And it was in that treatment center that I surrendered to the first step. And I screamed out to God that if he would just get me sober and keep me sober, I would do anything I was asked to do in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I never knew that when I screamed out that prayer, what a gift I was giving myself when I did that, because I have been able to do that in my sobriety. I have been able to work with so many women in this program. I have been able to take so many women through the steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have been blessed beyond anything I can even imagine in the past 43 years of my sobriety. I believe that I just can't even, sometimes I can't even believe it. It has been so amazing. When I was 5 years sober, I was living in Southern California, and I was on my way to an AA meeting. I don't even know for sure if Teddy was at that AA meeting that day, but we went to a lot of the same meetings together at the time I was living in the Simi Valley, and I was going to an AA meeting somewhere in the valley. Cannot remember exactly where, but I was going to a meeting, and I got a phone call from my daughter-in-law that my oldest son had put a pair of scissors in his stomach. And I was on my way to that meeting, and I was just hysterical. And when I got to that meeting, the way I felt is that both of my children were dying. My oldest son was dying because he mutilated himself, and my youngest son was down on Venice Beach running, drugging, and drinking, and doing all the things he did. And I went into that meeting that day, and it was one of the meetings it's a meeting that I can't stand today. But that meeting saved me, because it was one of those meetings that the leader starts off, "Does anybody have a problem tonight?" And what I did is I raised my hand, and I told everybody about my two sons and what was going on. And this man in the back was just sitting there, and he said, "You need to turn those boys over." And I jumped out of that chair and I screamed, "Do you want to tell me how to do that?" And of course, he didn't know either. But what happened that night is a woman walked up to me in that meeting, and she was a double winner. And she said, "Polly, I'll be picking you up tomorrow night and taking you to a meeting." And what happened is that she took me to an Al-Anon meeting. And those women surrounded me in that Al-Anon meeting. And they told me, "Polly, of course you feel the way you feel. You're a mom. But what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to love your sons without it killing you." And that is when I entered the rooms of Al-Anon. And I am so grateful that I have been able to be a member of Al-Anon, because I know that day, if those women had not done that, I don't believe that I'd be sober today, because I was in so much pain. Both of my sons were dying, and I was 5 years sober. And I was just in so much pain. So today, I attribute that. I don't know if I really knew that in the beginning of my sobriety. You know, it's so funny. As you stay sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, the things that have happened to us in our childhood, the things that have happened to us before, you know, in the years before we got sober, and then after we get sober, it sort of changes. It sort of changes because what happens is my perception of my reality changes, and my perception of that reality changes. And I just see things today a lot differently than I saw them in my early sobriety. And today, I am someone who has an amazing life. For the last 5 years, I have been my husband's caregiver, and I never could take care of my first husband, but I had an amazing sponsor. My second sponsor was a woman named Dottie Harris. She was my sponsor for 33 years until she died. And she used to say that life is just a spiritual classroom. And we're just here to learn whatever it is we need to learn in this lifetime. And what happened is that I've been in a spiritual classroom. And today, and she used to also say, we get, you know, that we get to do do-overs. She says we get to repeat for correction. And I've gotten to repeat a lot of things for correction. And one of those things is that today, this self-centered, selfish alcoholic could never take care of my first husband. And I couldn't even take care of him after I got sober because I was still such a newcomer and so selfish that I spent all my time in AA. I was no better to my children. I was still neglectful because I spent all my time in AA. And I still didn't take care of my husband. So I had not gotten past that selfish, self-centered newcomer either. And then I ended up divorcing my husband and marrying a member of this fellowship, which on October the 27th, he and I will celebrate 40 years of marriage. Dave and I have been together for 40 years. And so I'm just, life is amazing. Life is just amazing. And I've had a lot of repeat for correction. I had this amazing 80th birthday last Saturday, a week ago. I had this amazing birthday, and I had all 5 of my grandchildren there, my sons, and their wives, and it was just amazing. Friends, sponsees. It was just an amazing event. And I've had such a repeat for correction because I've been a wonderful grandma. And one of my grandsons said, "Grandma, I just miss our cuddles." And it's just been, I look back and I think, you know, how God has been present and working in my life the whole time. So what happened is that I ended up in 1990, and it was really so amazing. So this book was given to me in 89, and in 1990, I got a call from a woman in Oregon. Eugene, Oregon, and it was at a retreatment center. It was at a retreat center, and she asked me to speak. I had no idea what I was. You know, I thought it was just going to speak and to, you know, share your experience, strength, and hope. And a little bit before the retreat, she called me and she said, "What is your retreat theme? What is the theme of your retreat?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "Oh, yes, you're our retreat master. You're going to give a retreat for the whole weekend. Now, I'm telling you, I nearly dropped right then. Now this was in 1990. So now I guess I'm 13 years sober. I never, ever in my life done a retreat. And I didn't have a clue what I was going to do it on. And so I called my AA sponsor and I couldn't get a hold of her. And then I called my Al-Anon sponsor and I did get a hold of her. And I told her, I've got to do this retreat at this for the whole weekend. How do you do that? And she says, well, Polly, what has really meant a lot to you? What has happened that recently that has had a great effect on you? And I thought a minute and I said, oh my God, it's that emotional sobriety that I read in the language of the heart. I said, that has just turned my life around. It has made me see things so differently. It's made me see emotions so differently and see the immaturity. And she says, I think there was a woman who did a workshop on that emotional sobriety at Brownwood, which was a women's retreat that we went to. And she said, I think I have the paperwork. And so what she did is she sent that paperwork to me. And what I did as a result is I was able to take that. I was able to take this reading from Bill, and I was able to do a workshop. And I did the very first emotional sobriety workshop in 1990 in Eugene, Oregon. And what was really amazing is the very first time I did the emotional sobriety on Zoom, there was a woman on the Zoom that was in that workshop in 1990. And I'm like, oh my God, it was, it's like, this is what happens with Zoom, because it's so amazing, because my life has changed. I traveled all the time. It was just part of my life was traveling. And I haven't been able to do that in the last 5 years because Dave's been sick. And I tell you what's happening is I guess we're in Northern California, Yvonne. I know for sure that we're at least in Wisconsin because Debbie's taping. And I got to just travel there to California and Wisconsin. I didn't even have to get on an airplane. And Dave is in the living room watching television. So it is an amazing gift for me to be able to Zoom. It has given me back my life. And I just love it. I absolutely love all the things that I have got to do. And as I have got to be, have been able to be a person who shared my experience, strength, and hope, and also to all the Zooms I've got to watch. I've watched so many conferences and done so many things on Zoom. I'm probably pretty much in at least 3 meetings a day. And on the weekends, I'm on all day. Seems like every weekend because there's something. I've got one of the women I sponsor in Champaign, Illinois. She's putting on her Oktoberfest this whole day. So when I get off of this, I'm going on there to finish up that. So it's amazing how we can do this. We just get on one Zoom to another, and we get to have all this stuff that we get to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. I did a huge in-depth step study, and we've done that on Zoom. I mean, it's just, there is no end to what we can do and how much more we can learn about this program and how much more we can enhance our own recovery. For me, it's just been amazing. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start emotional sobriety. Thank you so much, Yvonne, for reading it, because I'm not always the greatest reader. Sometimes I trip over the words and such as that. So I thank you so much for being the person that did that. And it's like I said, what I did is I saw that squiggly writing And when I began to see that always what it had been is my faulty dependencies, my dependencies on what you thought of me, of what I thought of myself. It was always these faulty dependencies. And it was always that lie that I told myself all my life. And that was that I just never, ever measured up. I never, ever had that feeling of quite being good enough, and knowing that it all has to do with finding the God of my understanding, because I am today God's precious child, and all of you are God's precious children. And I know today that emotional sobriety has to do with character defects. I know that the thing that separates me from God is my character defects. And I love what Chuck always said. And Chuck says we have one problem, and that problem is conscious separation from God and man. And we have one solution, and that's conscious contact with God and man. And then I got to be very close to Sandy. And Sandy carried on that message of we have to have, that we cannot have any kind of conflict with anybody. I cannot have any problems with any of God's kids. What an order. I can't go through with it. What an order. So today, that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in emotional sobriety, is that we're going to talk about our character defects. And most of my character defects all surround being around other people, places, and things. Okay. As the big book so clearly states, if we want the AA Al-Anon way of life, we must become willing to go to any lengths to get it and be ready to take certain steps to stop ourselves from drinking and stinking thinking. We recognize these are symptoms. We must get to the underlying causes of our physical addiction and mental obsessions. Now, for one thing, today I know that I am mentally and bodily different from my fellows. And what has ever made me mentally and bodily different from my fellows has always been there. And I know today that bodily and physically, I am absent from any mind-altering substance. So bodily, I have today taken care of. Mentally, I am always, the disease, the big book says, rests in the mind. I am physically sober, but I am mentally ill. And I desperately need this program. I desperately need the steps, traditions, and concepts. I desperately need to constantly be addressing my thinking. Most of us discover that the major cause of our living problems stem from emotional immaturity. Now, I don't know about you, but I am 80 years old. I'm sure nobody else on this call probably is 80 years old. If you are, God bless you. But most of us think like kids. Sometimes I have the emotions of a teenager. I get my feelers hurt so easily. Anybody work with somebody really hard? You've got a sponsee who you're working with really hard, and all of a sudden she calls you on the phone and she says, "Thank you so much for your time and all you've done for me, but I have gotten another sponsor. I think she can address my problem so much better." Oh, what do you mean? After all I've done for you? Blah, 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 blah. Instead of having the emotional maturity that would be, God bless you, sweetheart. And sometimes all of us can say that, but it takes a while before we mean it. God bless you, that you are going to move on so that you can get better in your own recovery. So these are the things I'm talking about, how we get grabbed by that immaturity and think it's about us. And I think I'm kind of getting there, that it's not about me. It's not about me. And the more I know that it's not about me, the more ease and comfort I get to experience. We seem to be people who have no defenses against the onslaughts of misguided feelings. I am powerless over my feelings. They're going to come and go, but I am not powerless over my actions. And I can look at my feelings and take an action. I love this statement. Take an action contrary to the way I feel. And I do that a lot. I take actions contrary to the way I feel a lot. I do not always have to let somebody know how I feel. Because you know what? More than likely, in 5 seconds, it'll pass. And if I just blast out to somebody how I feel, I have harmed somebody with what I felt at that moment. And 5 minutes later, I won't have that feeling anyway, especially if I take an action contrary to the way I feel. If it's a negative feeling, if I take a positive action, I'm going to feel differently. We tend to go to extremes in coping with emotional pain and discomfort. Usually, I'm going to kill myself. I can't live another moment. We're calling everybody we know. I'm going to kill myself. I can't live another moment. And the next thing we want is everybody running to our side, saving our lives. I mean, I don't know if any of you are hysterical, but I am. And I have had a lot of years in my beginning sobriety of living like that and prior to sobriety. Emotion. Usually, though, through some kind of attempted escape, we become aware after coming to the program that intoxicants we need to be aware of are not alcohol and drugs, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to talk about the intoxicants of alcohol and drugs, but the emotional intoxicants of anger, self-pity, intolerance, resentment, jealousy, dishonesty, self-deception, criticism, fear, depression, and blame. And what we're going to do, if any of you have ever read an old book, and it's one I loved so much, and it's called Stools and Bottles. And I did a lot of this workshop from that pamphlet, Stools and Bottles. And what it talks about is how these emotional intoxicants can cause us to behave as though we're drinking and act so emotionally immature. To achieve emotional sobriety, we need a couple of attributes: a willingness to change and a power greater than ourselves that will provide the strength we need to change. God will change us if we just let him. God will change us if we can surrender to God's will. We must recognize that progress is an unending journey and perfection an unreachable goal. And while we have a long way to go, we must make the journey. To stand still is to stagnate. The following are some quotations that set the mood for our emotional sobriety workshop. I can be myself when I am in a situation I like. Can I be myself in a situation I don't like? And that's anonymous. Some alcoholic said that. And I try to remember that. And I think Al-Anon talks a lot about that. That's one of the things that I've learned in Al-Anon is just, is just trying to remove my thinking from the situation. Because most of the time, it's not about me. It's just my selfish, self-centered alcoholic who thinks it's about me. Rarely have we seen a person fail has thoroughly followed our path. That's on page 58 in the big book. The situation rests with me. I don't know, I'm sure this is put on by Al-Anon, so I'm sure a lot of you are ODAD readers. I'm a daily ODAD reader, so this is from the ODAD. The solutions rest with me. People can affect me only as I allow them to. I need not be influenced by others, for I am free to consult my own wishes and standards. With the help of my higher power, I can adorn my life with comfort, serenity, and enjoyment. It does not depend on any other person, and the sooner I accept this fact, the sooner I will be able to face myself realistically one day at a time. And that's page 228 of the ODAD. And I want to share a story about that. And I'm going to check my time here. I got a few more minutes before it's 1 o'clock. I want to check my time. I want to share something with you. I have 2 sons. My youngest son got sober when I was 6.5 years sober. So I have walked this walk with my youngest son for 36 years. Last year in October was 2 years ago, in October was a time in my life I will never forget. First of all, it was a time when my husband came to, he almost went home. He was so sick. And one of my friends came to me and said, "Polly, do you mind if I ask Gary to pray for Dave?" And I said, "No, not at all. I'd love for Gary to pray for Dave." And Gary was Vicky's pastor. And Gary started coming and praying for Dave. And what happened is a few weeks later, because Dave was in the hospital for over a month and he was very sick. He was evaluated for hospice. It was a terrible time in our lives. And Vicky came to me and she said, "Polly, would you like to go to church with me?" And Dave and I had been going to churches that were non-denominational. And because I really had not totally healed from what had been so planted in my brain by the fear I had for God, not feeling like I'd ever measure up to God, not really believing in my heart of hearts that God would forgive me for all the things I had done. And what happened is I went to that church that day, and I was absolutely just covered with God's grace. I had such a feeling. And what I'd like to tell you is what a sense of humor that God has. And that sense of humor is that Dave and I are now members of the Southside Baptist Church. And I want you to know that that Baptist church was on every one of my inventories. And today, and I will assure you that the church I go to today has no resemblance of the church I went to 50 years ago. Absolutely, or longer than 70 60 years ago, 60 years ago. What am I thinking? I'm 43 years sober. I'm 80 years old. That all of those years ago has no resemblance. So what I get to say, if any of you had the privilege of ever hearing an alcoholic by the name of Keith Lewis, he's in the big meeting now. But Keith's sponsor told him when he first got sober, Keith, go right on your mirror. Keith, you're wrong. So one of the things that I get to see is, Polly, you were wrong. All those years that I carried that negative thinking, I was wrong. And so today we have that. The other amazing miracle that also happened in October, really November 2 years ago, is my oldest son called me on the phone. Now, my oldest son, May 9th, turned 60 years old. My oldest son called me on the phone and told me he was going to rehab. Today, my oldest son is 2 years sober in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you're waiting for somebody to come, if you're waiting for somebody to get here, I can just tell you, I never thought it would happen. Russ got here when he was 58 and a half years old. And all I know is God's timing is perfect. God's timing is always perfect. And I cannot even begin to tell you how amazing and what he shared on my birthday last week is beyond anything. And he and I had a relationship at an arm's length. I just never could quite have a close relationship with my oldest son. There just seemed like there was always this wedge between us. And today that wedge is gone. And today I know that wedge was alcoholism. Don't give up. God's timing is perfect. It's just absolutely perfect. And it's just amazing. I never, ever believed it would happen. And what I'm grateful for is I lived long enough to see it happen. I'm so grateful. That's just kind of some things I just want to share about, because it's so true. And it says that if I just let God have it, and that's what the ODOT tells us, and the program of Al-Anon tells us, if I'll just let God work it out. I can tell you, sometimes God's timing is really long, but what I know is his timing. It's perfect. So, at any rate, just letting our higher power depend on it. And the sooner I accept that fact, that I'm just going to have to let God work it out, I am powerless. I am powerless over people, places, and things. I'm powerless. I cannot change another person. If we desire, or at least diminish, emotional slips and binges brought to the surface and aggravated by the problem of alcoholism, then we are ready to say to ourselves, half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We ask his protection and care with complete abandon. I must give up. Page 59 in the big book. The 12 and 12 in step 10. When a drunk has a terrific hangover because he drank heavily yesterday, he cannot live well today. But there is another kind of hangover, which we all experience, whether we are drinking or not. This is the emotional hangover, the direct result of yesterday's and sometimes today's excesses of negative emotion, anger, fear, jealousy, and the like. It requires an admission and correction of errors now. That's in step 10. Also in step 10 is it is a spiritual axiom. And this is in the 12 and 12. It is a spiritual axiom that every time I'm disturbed, no matter what the cause, there is something wrong with us. So what I have to know is whatever is going on, whatever is bothering me, is not what is going on with other people. It is my reaction to what's going on. It is my responsibility. Whatever is wrong, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with me. It has nothing to do with you. And I have to change my reaction to how I react to what you're doing. And this is the job we have. It's a lifetime job. Finding ourselves locked into the intoxicating grip of certain emotions and suffering the pain and mental hangover from these, we found it necessary to learn which ones are poisonous and threatening to our emotional sobriety and serenity. We learned that we can avoid these emotions and their crippling effects if we can act our way into right thinking. We do this by saying to ourselves, if I were not jealous, depressed, anxious, so on and so forth, etc., what would I be thinking, feeling, or doing? I have to be responsible for my own actions and my own feelings. We step out on faith after asking God's guidance, and we try to remember, easy does it, but do it. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to give us a little break, is I'm going to spend the next time with you talking about my character defects. And this is a list of my character defects. Now, you can do this work and you can do your character defects. But what we're going to do is talk about mine, because that's really the only one I know anything about. So why don't we take a 10-minute break and everybody go get a cup of coffee and any other personal needs that need taking place. And we'll meet back here in 10 minutes.